During my 6-7 years of YouTube career, I always get this question. How to get started with the Spring framework? How to get started with Spring Boot? And this is a very specific question and a lot of people ask me about it. How to get started with Spring Boot? What is the right approach to get started with the Spring Boot? And what are the prerequisites? So in this video, we're going to be finding out the right approach to learn Spring Boot and the exact way to learn Spring Boot. And let me tell you, Spring is the #1 framework in the Java market right now. And if you are trying out your career in Java development field, this is the framework that you have to learn, because every Java interview that you'll go, they will be asking about Spring and Spring Boot. So Spring is really fast, but how much you have to know? And what is the minimum prerequisite to learn Spring? Let's find out in this particular video. Hi, my name is Avilas and you're watching Selenium Express. Before we get started with this topic, let's roll the intro. Okay, so let's just get started with this topic. How to learn Spring Boot. Before we start understanding Spring Boot, let me tell you what is Spring. So Spring, as I said, it is a Java framework. And as I said, this is having the most market share in the market right now. And this is the #1 Java framework in this particular time. If you go to web and look for the top 10 Java framework, in every website, you want to be finding Spring is in the #1 place. So Spring is something that you got to learn before you switch your job, before you get into a job. Basically, if you are looking for a Java developer role, okay? So as I said, Spring is a framework. So what is basically a framework? So framework is something which makes the developer job easy. For an example, if you want to build some application, let's say you want to build a web application or a batch application or a portlet application or a web service, or maybe you want to create something, you won't be creating that from scratch. Rather, you will be taking a help of a framework. The framework will do the initial stuff. You can borrow that stuff from the framework and can develop your things on top of it. For an example, if you want to create a shopping cart application, then this shopping cart application is going to be a web application that you will be creating. So you want to build some e-commerce site and you have some business idea, but before you start creating a website, right? And before you start writing all your business logic, you have to set it up first. You have to set up an environment and you have to write some of the low level code so that it will be eligible for a request response model. For an example, in website, what we do, we accept request, then we serve a response to the client. So any website you go, it accepts request and gives you a response back. And the business happens right over there. So based on the pages that you are showing, the customer clicks on some products, they ended up buying them, and that's how the business happened. So you have some business goal like this. So it's not like it is going to be very easy to get started with all this thing. So you have the business logic ready, but to set up a kind of environment and to set up an environment in Java, to write a web application, to have that minimum requirement thing done, we need to take a help of a framework. We will not be writing everything from scratch, but rather we'll be taking a help from a framework like Spring that, hey Spring, I want to create a web application. Can you please help me to create a web application? Now Spring will say, okay, I have so and so project. I have a project called Spring Web MVC. If you want to create any web application in Java, then I have some basic and minimum things, some minimum requirements that you're going to be needing to develop a website. I have written those components, I have written those classes, I have a lot of configurations. I have set it off in a project called Spring Web MVC. You can take that Web MVC project and can use it in your project. So what I will do, I'll go to the Spring website or like the Maven website. I will take the Spring Web MVC project and I put it inside my project class path. And then on top of that, I will be start writing my business logic. So Spring is taking care of writing all the low level stuff and giving me an environment so that I can rapidly start writing my code, which is going to be my business code, and I can end up writing my entire or the whole web application. So Spring has a project which helped me to get started and to write my business logic and to complete a web application. So Spring is going to help you to create any web app. What about if I want to create an application and if I want to connect my application to an external database? It's also going to be very easy with Spring. If you go and download the jar called Spring JDBC and if you attach it with your application, this is going to be so easy for your application to connect to your database and to make some CRUD operation. So the Spring JDBC project is going to make your job easy as a developer if your application wants to connect to a database. Just like that, if you have an application and you want to protect your application from hacker, so you can take the help of Spring Security Project. You can download the Spring Security jar and you can keep it with your project, and you can use some of the features from the Spring Security Project in order to protect your application from the hacker. This is so exciting, isn't it? We don't have to do much work as a developer. We are just keeping the Spring Security Project in our project class path and it is doing wonders for us. Not only this, let's say if you are creating an application which needs to read the data from a very big Excel sheet, then if your application wants to process the data and read the data from an Excel sheet, it can take the help from another Spring project called Spring Batch, and it can use the Spring Batch feature in order to read and process the data from a very big Excel sheet. Not only this, let's say if you have an application called Order Application, and let's say this application wants to communicate with some other application over HTTP using some RESTful endpoints, then you can keep the Spring Web MVC jar over here with your application, and your application is going to be eligible to make a REST call to different applications. So as we have discussed, using the Spring JDBC project, we can help our application to connect to a database. Using the Spring Security Project, we can protect our application from a hacker. Using the Spring Batch project, we can help our application to read and process a big Excel sheet. Like that, we can do a whole variety of things using different Spring Framework projects. So if you want to go to your Google and if you can search for Spring Framework, you're going to be finding a lot of different projects that Spring has, like this. You can see all these are different projects which does specific things. So if you're going to click on this Spring logo, you can see Spring can do a whole variety of things. It can help you to create microservices. It can help you to create reactive application. It can help you to create cloud native application. It can help you to create web apps. It can help you to create event driven application, batch application. It can do a whole variety of things. And if you can go over here to the projects, and if you can click on Spring Framework here, you can see these are all different projects that you have to learn if you are planning to learn Spring Framework. So using all these projects, you can do variety of different things. You can also come to the project section and click on overview and see the different projects which are available in Spring and the projects that you are planning to learn right now. So now the first question from you will be, what is the first thing that I have to learn? Tell me the path to learn the Spring Framework. Do I need to learn everything? I will tell you the path, and the good news is you don't have to learn everything that you are saying over here. With very specific thing, you can grab a job and can do all the stops in your job as well. And I'm gonna have a step-by-step guide for you to learn the Spring Framework. You can exactly follow that particular learning path to master Spring Framework. Okay, so this is how you're going to be learning the Spring Framework, which is the #1 Java framework that you have in the market right now. So before you learn Spring, these are the prerequisites. The first thing that you have to learn is the Java core, or the core Java. You have to understand the basic OOPs. You have to understand the collection framework. You have to understand a little bit of the Java basic concepts, and you can ignore the serialization, threading, and all the stuffs for a moment, but along the way, you're going to be also needing them as well. So having a solid foundation on Java is going to help you to understand the Spring Framework. At least the OOPs and the collection are the basic prerequisites to get started with Spring. And along the way, you can master multi-threading, serialization, and the other Java concepts. The next thing, okay, one more important thing is like the JDBC. It's really important to understand about the JDBC and how to connect to a database using JDBC, using plain raw Java before jumping to the Spring framework. So understand about JDBC, at least one particular database like MySQL or SQL Server or something, okay? The next thing is going to be the Solid. Solid is a design principle. I will make it optional for you guys, but any Java developer having idea on Solid is really going to find it helpful along the way, because Solid covers a lot of basic design principle that every Java developer should have, and having an idea of Solid is also going to help you to understand Spring better, but I will make it optional. The next thing is going to be the JSP and Servlet. I will tell JSP as legacy, but still JSP and Servlets plays a very vital role in order to understand Spring web layer better. Like, you know, Spring web MVC, there is a module is there. So if you want to understand a web MVC module better, the Spring basically abstracts out a lot of different things. And we as a Java developer will not directly deal with the servlets in our Spring framework, but Spring internally uses servlets a lot. So having a understanding what are the servlets, how to create servlets, and why do we need servlets, what are the different lifecycle of servlets, right? And different API methods and the API classes of servlets will really help. So have a good understanding of servlets. I am not telling you to have a master degree on servlet. At least a basic understanding of servlet will really help when you are trying to learn Spring. So servlet and JSP, a little bit of understanding will be enough. You don't have to do courses on that, or like, you know, you don't have to have a very solid foundation, but a little bit of idea about servlet and JSP will help. All right, the next important thing to learn here is called the web server. You know that whenever you're going to be working with any web application, you have to deploy it in a web server. So it's really important to understand what is a web server, what is an application server, what is Tomcat, what is JBoss, what are the different types of server that we have. At least you learn about Tomcat, right? That's the important one. And you can also go ahead and start learning about JBoss, Glassfish, and some more servers as well. And then whenever you'll be learning Spring or Spring Boot, you'll be understanding what is an embedded server. So if you do not understand what is a web server, it is very difficult to understand what is an embedded web server. So make sure to understand web server as a prerequisite. At least just see what is a web server, how to download it, how to install it, how to deploy a web application inside a web server. Have that understanding. It'll help you along the way. The next one is a build tool. All right, something called Maven or Gradle. These are two different types of build tools that we have, what we basically use in our market right now. So having understanding either of this or both of these will really help whenever you are understanding Spring or Spring Boot. So make sure you at least learn one, Maven or Gradle, which will help you to build your application and help you to create a jar or what out of it, what you're going to be taking further and deploying it inside a web server. So understand it. This is important. The next one is Git. This is optional, I will say. It's not like if you don't understand Git, you'll not be able to understand Spring. It's nothing like that. But having an understanding of Git is really help you to have an understanding about a source control. So Git, SVN, ClearCase, any of this tool, just understand how to check in your code, how to check out your code, how to rebase your code. Have an understanding about this. This will help you in real time, but this is optional to learn Spring. You don't really have to learn Git to get started with Spring. So this is optional. So here core Java is mandatory. Little bit of JSP servlets are mandatory. Having an understanding of Maven is mandatory, and a little bit of understanding web server is also required. These are the prerequisites of Spring.
You gotta focus on yourself, on your faith, on your dreams, on your mind, on your health, yeah. You gotta work, never tell, keep your head down, find what you love.
Now let's just understand how to go further from here and how to enhance our skill in Spring. What are the exact modules that we have to learn and the path to learn Spring? Because there are a lot of things in Spring. We can do a lot of different things in Spring. We don't have to learn everything, but what are the minimum thing that we have to learn in Spring, or what exactly it is? So let's get started. So the first thing that you have to learn here called Spring Core. And the Spring Core is the building block of Spring. It's like the first thing that you have to learn before you get started with the Spring framework. This will teach you how to use Spring. So what is a Spring container or an IOC container? What are beans? What are bean scopes? What are the life cycle of bean? How to deal with property files? A lot of different things you'll be learning over here inside the Spring core. Like dependency injection. There are a lot of features you're going to be learning and exploring in Spring Core, what you'll be using in every different modules of Spring. So the Spring Core project that you have to learn first before you get started with the Spring framework or the Spring Boot framework. Once you understand Spring Core, and once you have a basic idea of Spring Core and the Spring IOC container and how it works, jump to Spring MVC. Learn this MVC design pattern, understand how to create web projects, how to deploy it inside a web server. Learn a little bit about it before you move to Spring Boot. It's very important to have an understanding about the MVC design pattern and configuring different components of Spring, by yourself. Learn it, like how to configure everything by ourselves as a developer. We don't have to take a help of any different tools or framework like Spring Boot in order to create a project for us. We will be creating the projects by ourselves, a web MVC project, and we'll be creating a kind of web application. We'll be deploying it separately into a Tomcat server. We'll be seeing the entire flow by ourselves. And that's something that you're going to be doing in the Spring MVC module, building out a web application and deploying it inside a web server. The next one will be the Spring JDBC. Well, it's very important to understand a little bit about how to connect to the database using the Spring JDBC project. All these things are projects: Spring JDBC, Spring MVC, Spring Core. Use the Spring JDBC project to create some CRUD application and connect it to a database like MySQL or SQL Server using the Spring framework, and building all this project using the Spring components. And once you understand Spring JDBC, learn the Spring Boot fundamentals. A lot of people do what? They start from Spring Boot, and that's why a lot of things gets abstracted and they don't understand like what the heck is going on behind the scene, because Spring Boot abstracts out a lot of different things. So make sure when you are starting Spring Boot, you should have at least some idea on the Spring framework and how different things works. So having understanding of core, MVC and JDBC will help you to learn Spring Boot as well. So whenever you'll be starting out Spring Boot, you should have some idea on Spring already. So Spring Boot will be nothing for you. It's just going to make your things easy. And whenever you'll be start to learn the Spring Boot, you'll be happy because you'll be seeing a lot of things are getting easier for you, and you'll be loving Spring Boot, because here whenever you are building projects with Spring Boot, MVC and core, there you'll struggle because you are learning it for the first time. You'll struggle how different things works. But when you start to use Spring Boot, as you have already struggled and as you have already found out the idea how different things works, the Spring Boot journey will be really easy and straightforward. And once you learn Spring Boot and how to develop applications using Spring Boot, you just start creating some projects. If you already know Spring Boot and you already know Spring MVC, the Spring Boot MVC is nothing. It's just like using Spring MVC using Spring Boot. So there's something that you're going to be doing over here, and you'll be creating some of the projects. And to create projects, to create web application, use some of the things like JSP. You have already learned JSP, and along the way, you can learn time leaf or free marker before you reach this level. And the time leaf and the free marker are some template engines, and using all these three things you can build web pages, and you can use those things with Spring MVC and Spring Boot as a backend, and you can use JSP and Timeleaf or FreeMarker as a front end, and you can start building projects and you can start deploying them into a web server which is embedded, or maybe to AWS. That will make you feel like a developer, and that will make you feel like, okay, I'm building out some projects by myself, and that's really nice. Okay, so the next thing that you're going to be learning is the Spring Data JPA. Now here comes the JPA part. JPA is something like which is gonna help you to connect to a database. So JPA, you can treat it like an API, and there are some vendors like Hibernate and MyBetties. So you learn Hibernate before you learn Spring Data JPA, because Hibernate is the prerequisite to learn the Spring Data JPA. Without learning Hibernate also, you can jump to Spring Data JPA, but that's going to abstract out again a lot of different things that you have to learn as a developer. So what I feel like, before you jump to Spring Data JPA, learn Hibernate, learn what is JPA, and Hibernate is a provider, or MyBTS is a provider. You learn about those frameworks, and then you start to learn Spring Data JPA, and this is going to help you how to connect to database using JPA as a framework. Previously, you have learned the JDBC. JDBC is another way to connect to the database using this project or this module. This is another module. This is a JPA way of connecting to the database. Anyhow, JPA uses JDBC behind the scene. So that's a different story. One more thing is that before you learn the Spring Data JPA, it's also important to learn about the Spring ORM. The Spring ORM is just the, how you'll be integrate an ORM framework like Hibernate or MyBTS with Spring. As we are learning Hibernate over here, whenever you are learning Hibernate, learn it independently. Just like Spring is a framework, Hibernate is a framework. You have to learn it because Spring uses is behind the scene, and then you just try to create a Spring MVC project and start integrating Hibernate with Spring and learn how to deal with the ORM thing. ORM will teaches you how to deal with the transaction, how to create the connections, how to deal with the different drivers that you have, how to manage connections. There are a lot of different things you'll be doing with ORM. So learn Spring ORM, and then whenever you'll be learning Spring Data JPA, as you have a solid foundation on Hibernate and Spring ORM, it is going to help a lot to master the Spring Data JPA module. Okay. Once you reach to this level, I'm sure that you will have a foundation about a lot of different components of Spring and a lot of different projects of Spring, and also the ecosystem of Spring. You might have started to understand Spring a lot better by the time you reach here. And from now on, you should move to the next important thing, which is the prerequisite for microservices as well. You should learn the Spring REST, the web services part of the Spring. In the Spring REST module, you'll understand how to develop web services, how to provide different endpoints to the consumer or the third party who can use your services. And you'll learn to write APIs for different vendors, and that is going to make you really prominent with the web services concepts, and that's really important for today's generation. Okay, here also you will be understanding about some of the tools like Postman or SOAP UI. These are the tools that you're gonna be using to hit or fire requests to a web server. So SOAP UI or Postman, you can learn either of them, and there are a lot of latest tools are also there in the market as well. So after you learn the Spring REST, the next thing is the Spring AOP, and that is the aspect-oriented programming. If you really want to understand Spring better, like how the Spring works or the Spring Boot work, just understand the Spring AOP module, because the internal thing of Spring, whenever you'll be debugging, this guy will come along your way. So make sure you are understanding what is aspect, what is advice, what is point caught, what is join point, what is dynamic proxy, what is AOP proxy, and all these things in this particular module. And that is going to help you whenever you are understanding different topics like Spring security, transaction management. This topic is going to help you a lot, how basically the behind the scene works happens. This is the module that you have to focus if you want to understand that. The next one that you should be concerned about is the Spring security. Is the most important module of Spring. And if you are creating any application, whether it is a web application, whether it is a RESTful application, whether it is a standalone application, you have to worry about your application security. And for that, Spring has a different project or a module called Spring Security. And that's the next thing that you have to do. Understand about the Spring security, how basically you will be securing your REST application, your web application, how you'll be using JWT, the tokens, the OAuth, and all these things in this particular module. Once you have an understanding on Spring security, make sure that you are spending some good amount of time on that. And once you understand that, you have to jump to the next one called the Spring test. And here in the test module, you'll be learn to write unit test cases for your project. So as a developer, it is so important to understand the the testing thing, how you will be writing the unit test cases, maybe using JUnit. So you have to learn some prerequisites like JUnit and Mockito before you jump to the Spring test, because in the Spring test module you'll be writing the test cases using JUnit only. So you'll be integrating JUnit and Spring together. So make sure you should know what is JUnit, what is Mockito, what is Spy, what is PowerMock, all these things before you move to the Spring test module. So these are the prerequisites. And once you understand this module, the next one is going to be logging. How you'll be log something in your application for your debugging and for tracking and tracing purpose. And it's going to be a very easy thing to implement and to do, but there are some prerequisites required like log4j or logback. These are some logging frameworks which are available in Java. So learn about log4j API, learn about logback, learn about SLF4j as a prerequisites before you start understanding the logging and how to do logging in Spring. And the next one is going to be the Spring JMS. The way you are creating applications, your application is communicating with another application using the HTTP as a protocol. Like that, two applications can communicate with messages, and Spring JMS teaches you exactly that. Instead of HTTP protocol, you're going to be using messaging protocol. And to understand the Spring JMS, you have to understand some prerequisites like Kafka, RabbitMQ, ActiveMQ, and all this. So JMS is another module that you should be targeting as well, right? And after that, you can go for the Spring Batch, or Spring Batch you can also learn before JMS, there is no problem. And once that is done, there are so much other things to do. But one good thing I'll give you is Spring Data Mongo. Like I told you to learn Spring Data JPA. This is like connecting to a SQL database using the JPA as a technology. I also told you to learn Spring JDBC. This is to connect to a database using JDBC as a technology or technique. And like that, if you want to connect to some NoSQL database like MongoDB, Spring Data is also have support for that. And as a prerequisite, learn MongoDB, how to use MongoDB and all this thing. Okay, these are very simple things that I have shown you, and these are some most important things that I picked for you out of many modules which are available in Spring. So at least consider learning Spring Core, MVC, learn Spring Boot MVC, learn Data JPA, REST, AOP, security, testing, logging, JMS, Batch, and MongoDB. All these things are important. I don't want you to skip anything out of all these things. And once you understand this much, then you can go for microservices. So do not jump to microservices without completing all these things. Otherwise, it is going to be too hectic. I hope you understand this. Now, the most important question that you guys will be having is, hey, you know what? I'm here to learn Spring Boot, and you are not mentioning even once what is Spring Boot. I'm here to learn Spring Boot, not Spring Framework. So tell me what I have to learn in Spring Boot, right? I'm here only to learn Spring Boot. Why are you talking about all these projects? I'm not here to learn all these things. Excuse me, boss. Your confusion is going to be clear out in a minute. Now let's just understand why Spring Boot is so popular and why everybody are so excited about Spring Boot. So let's imagine we want to create a shopping cart application. So the step number one, I'll go to my favorite IDE like IntelliJ, Eclipse, or NetBeans, or Visual Studio, and I will create a project called shopping cart app. Okay, the step number two. Once I created the project, I'll go to web and I'll start downloading some of the jars and will start placing this jar with my application. For an example, this is going to be a shopping cart application and I want to use Spring here. So I'll go to web and I will basically download the Spring basic feature jar and will attach it with this application. The next thing is I want this application to be connected to a database. So I will go ahead and add a Spring JDBC jar. And the next thing is this application is going to be a web application. So I will go ahead and add the Spring Web MVC jar to this application as well. So once the project is ready with all the dependency, now the next step will be write some of the configuration code. So I'll write some configuration using all this jar that I have added taking the advantages of all the jar and different classes that is present inside the jar, I'll be writing some of the configuration to set up my shopping cart application. So this is the step number 3. So once I'm done with creating the project, adding the jar, and write some of the configuration code, as a developer right now I can focus on my business logic. So as I'm creating a shopping cart application, I'll be creating a page called product.html where I'll be displaying all my products that I have in my shopping cart application. And I will attach this page with an URL called /product. And now once it is done, to test this particular application, I will deploy it inside a web server like Tomcat. And now I can go ahead and can hit myshoppingcart.com/product to test this application and just to see whether my product.html is displaying. My business requirement here was very simple. It was just to create the product.html page. But in order to build this page, first I had to create this application. I had to add all this jar. I had to write some configuration. I have to deploy this particular project inside a Tomcat server, and a whole variety of things that I have done just because I wanted to write this particular page and I want to display this particular page in the web. Okay? So this is a traditional Spring framework approach. But now, ladies and gentlemen, let's introduce the beast, and that's called the Spring Boot. The Spring Boot is another project that we have in Spring Framework. And the Spring Boot basically doesn't do anything very specific when it comes to technology, but it is there to help you. It is there to help you as a developer. You as a developer will ask Spring that, hey Spring, I want to create a shopping cart application, and the tech stack that I want to use is going to be web app. It's going to be a web application, and I want to use a database. Once you say this to Spring Boot is going to do some magic, some black magic. And this is going to give you this. And boom, we got a project. So look at that. What Spring Boot has done for us. It has not only created the project for us, it has also added the dependency based on our choices. It also had written some of the configuration that I had to write as a Java developer if I don't use Spring Boot. It also have added a server support so that I can test my application and I can deploy it. And I as a developer don't have to add this Tomcat server manually. It is already there. So my job as a developer is going to be very simple. I will just write this particular page called product.html, and this is my business. This is where I want to do business. So I will be only concerned about that, and I'll create a URL called /product. And now I can go ahead and can test my application, and I can hit my shopping cart application /product, and I will be seeing my product.html page. Isn't it so cool that Spring Boot is helped me to create this entire thing by itself, and I as a developer is going to be very specifically looking into my development and business stuff. I am not worrying about all this stuff, creating the application, adding the jar, writing the configuration, and all these things has been taken care of by Spring Boot. So Spring Boot does this trick for me. So it is going to help me to create the production ready projects in minute, and I can trust Spring Boot on that. The next thing, it is going to help me for rapid development. I really don't have to do all the traditional thing by myself. All these things will be done by Spring Boot. So Spring Boot will not help you to write code or to do certain business need. It will only help you to set up your project, do some automatic configuration, managing your dependency, and you as a developer will only be concerned about doing the business, not doing the unnecessary things that you actually have to do as a developer most of the time. So this is the very important thing that we have to understand. Whenever we are talking about Spring Framework, the Spring Framework has different modules like WebMVC, Spring JDBC, Spring Security, Spring Batch, and blah blah blah. So many other modules or so many other projects that they are inside Spring Framework which does specific thing. But let's say if you're creating any WebMVC project or Spring JDBC project or a batch project or a security project just using raw Spring, then you have to take care of creating the project, adding the dependency, writing some code as a developer to set it up, and then writing the main important thing that you want to write like the business code. But when it comes to Spring Boot, the Spring Boot wraps the entire Spring framework. And what this guy will do, this guy will help you to quickly set up with all this project. If you want to use Spring Web MVC, you can use Spring Boot to generate the Spring Web MVC project so that it will add all the necessary jar inside your project, and also it will help you to write some of the configuration that you as a developer need to write. And it will help you to set up a project in minutes so that you as a developer will only be concentrate with the business code. And Spring Boot means Spring Framework itself. Spring Boot means you have to learn each of this module. And Spring Boot doesn't mean that there is something very specific that you have to learn and you have to skip all these things. Just remember, Spring Boot is your friend which can help you to set up Spring Framework, and with a very minimal knowledge also you can get started with Spring Framework. Okay, but Spring Boot doesn't say you that you should not know Spring MVC, Spring Security, Spring JDBC, Bash, and the other Spring Framework projects. You have to know about it, but this guy will help you to set it up. That's it. So once you're good with Spring Boot, the next thing that you should switch to microservices. You know, this is the trending tech right now, and you as a developer should upgrade your skills and should understand the microservices architecture. You should understand about how to write applications inside a microservices environment. You should have an idea about it. So see, a lot of people jump directly to the microservices because their company is forcing them to learn microservices, and they just skipped the previous thing that I have shown you, and that is going to be a really challenging scenario. This microservices, let's say you are developing and you are using Java as a technology and you are using Spring Boot as a framework, then you should at least understand what are different modules of Spring which are available, like core, MVC, REST, AOP, security, ORM, blah blah blah. And also you have to learn Spring Boot, as I said. That's really important. And then this microservices is just an architecture. This is nothing else. You'll not be learning something really fancy over here. You'll be learning some design patterns here. So I will be just saying the microservices fundamental. I'll be categorizing it into two different parts. One I will be saying is Spring Cloud, and one I will be mentioning it as design patterns. So the Spring Cloud part is like the Spring support for microservices. So as I said, the microservices is just some architecture, and there are some challenges. There are few design patterns we have to follow. And Spring Cloud is a project, is a combination of projects which will help you to solve different microservices related challenges. And there are different things you have to learn as part of Spring Cloud. And those things are HTTP clients, like different HTTP clients you should be learning, like Fin client, Web client, REST template, and all these things, and how to make REST calls. Learn about that in HTTP clients. Create a lot of different services and make sure that all your services are communicating with each other using this HTTP client. So learn about it in a priority. The next thing will be the service discovery. This is some concept in microservices, and Spring Cloud is also providing solution. So service discovery is a pattern that you have to understand as part of Spring Cloud. You also need to understand what is gateway, what is load balancer, how to make your microservices fault tolerant, or resilient microservices, how you'll be building. You'll be learning about that, and Spring Cloud provides some of the support for Historics and Resilience 4J API. You can use that for this pattern. Next one is going to be the logging and tracing, and this is something you can use Spring Cloud. You can use Micrometer or Zipkin, or you can use ELK for this. There are a lot of different things you'll be learning under the logging and tracing. And under the design pattern, you'll be learning different design patterns like DDD, event-driven, event sourcing, CQRS, Saga, and all these things. So these are the design patterns that you have to learn at least. So DDD is a design pattern, CQRS is a design pattern, Saga is a design pattern. Like if you have transaction management, if you want to do in microservices, you can do it with Saga as a design pattern. So all these things you'll be learning as part of the design pattern section, and a lot of design patterns also you'll be learning under the Spring Cloud section. So once you learn Spring Boot, you go for the Spring Cloud and learn this design pattern in a priority. The next one will be the DevOps stuff. And at least you should learn about the Jenkins, the Docker, the Kubernetes, the AWS. Learn a little bit about all these things if you want to deploy your application effortlessly into cloud, like if you want to use AWS or GCP or something right over there. So basically make sure this DevOps part comes at last once you understand how to develop microservices, using Spring Boot and all these design patterns. Then you start worrying about DevOps like Docker, Kubernetes, AWS, and Jenkins. But if you are too much worried about this and you are not worrying pretty much about your backend skill, that's going to be a problem. Having DevOps skill is going to be important as a backend developer, but understand you are a developer first. So learn the development well, learn to create and develop projects using all these things and the previous things that I have shown you. Then you start worrying about the DevOps part. Then the next thing is the tools. And obviously there are a lot of tools that you have to understand and a lot of technology that you have to understand that you will be using in your microservices environment. There will be tools like YAML. YAML is important to write Swagger or Docker files. So understand YAML, understand about OpenAPI, learn about Swagger or OpenAPI, learn about Kibana, learn about Splunk, and there are a lot of tools. There are a lot of APIs, lot of technologies are available which you'll be using as a developer in a microservices environment. There are tons of things available. You don't have to learn everything, but having an understanding about different tools and what challenges it solves will really help you. Whatever company you go or whatever projects you will work, they'll be using something really similar like that. So these are the things. And these are the path, the way you should be proceeding further to learn Spring and Spring Boot. And one simple request is going to be, do not jump to microservices directly before completing the Spring stuff, because this is important to learn Spring if you want to develop microservices. It's going to be too easy to develop microservices if you know Spring. Understand about it. Okay, so these are the thing, and also there are some other Spring stuff you can learn along the way, like Webflogs, Project Reactor, the Reactive Spring. You can understand about Spring integration, the ESB. There are a lot of different things available in Spring Framework. You can explore that once you complete all this thing, because if you understand this much, whatever I said, the other modules of Spring are going to be too easy. You can learn it by yourself. You can just see the documentation and can complete it in a day if you have a good hold to Spring. I also have a lot of different courses that you can check out to learn all these things. These are available for free. Lot of courses are available for free in YouTube and also in my website, which is seleniumexpress.com. I do also have paid courses for all this thing. I don't want to advertise it over here, absolutely, because this video will go to YouTube. You can check my paid courses on my website as well. But learn it in this way from wherever you are learning, however you are learning. You're learning it from documentation, you're following some blogs, you're following some courses on Coursera or some other platform like Udemy or something, or maybe you are learning it from some institution or something. Follow the pattern. Do not skip something. If you are skipping something in between, and then whenever you are learning, you'll be confused, and again you have to go back and start learning those things. So if you are if you are in bench, or if you are a student, you are just coming to the Java field, you have ample amount of time, then you don't have to jump. You just go in that particular way. But if you're a professional, you have to manage. I don't know how you'll be managing, but let's say you are someone who is working with Spring Batch or Spring JMS, having no idea about Spring Core, then it's going to be difficult, right? So learn while you are working, and that's the only solution for you guys. And just find some time for yourself to learn and grow. Okay. I will just give you some of the recommendation. This is what I gained from my years of experience with this particular framework called Spring Framework, and the way I have learned it. But you are free to follow your way, but this is just my recommendation. So we as Java developer has two sides. One side is while we are at our job, while we are coding, and another side is while we are learning. Okay, so while you are coding, it's always best to use Spring Boot because it will help you to start with your project very quickly and effortlessly. But while learning, I will just go with the raw Spring framework because I know here I have to do the things manually. And if I do the things manually, then Spring Boot is going to be very easy for me because I will understand what Spring Boot does internally. Always remember, Spring Boot will help you to create the project, set up the dependency, and do some of the code configuration. But I as a developer also have to understand what Spring Boot does. Without that, the thing will be tricky when I have to solve issues or when I have to do some of the customization. For an example, let's say someone is learning Spring REST and he is learning that with Spring Boot. And I will also say learning Spring REST with Spring Boot is going to make your way very easy and you can learn it very quickly. But let's say you are learning Spring REST. So if you're going to Google and if you're going to see the documentation, you're going to be learning about this project called Spring Web MVC. You're going to be using this project inside your Spring REST project to get started. But let's say there is another guy who is learning Spring REST, but he is not using Spring Boot. He's using the raw Spring framework to create a manual project of Spring REST, and he's adding this dependency: Spring Web MVC, Jackson Core, Jackson Databine, and some other dependency. He will learn a lot. He will learn how basically the Spring REST framework works and how basically it uses all these things behind the scene. But the person who is learning Spring REST directly with Spring Boot, as Spring Boot is going to add all the dependency, and as Spring Boot is going to do a whole bunch of configuration for you, you will not be knowing what is happening internally, how the things are getting set up. So it is going to be your preference how you're going to be learning. If you want to learn in depth, first you learn it with the raw Spring framework and then you switch to Spring Boot. And you can do this initially for the first 4 or 5 modules that you are learning, and your learning curve will be very smooth after that. Okay, I'll give you another example. Let's say you want to connect to a database and you want to use JPA to connect to the database. So you will be using a dependency called starter data JPA. You will place this jar in your Spring Boot project and the Spring Boot will do a whole lot of configuration and your application will be ready to connect to the database. So it will be done in minutes by Spring Boot and you as a developer will be very happy because all the setup has been done by Spring Boot. But let's say another guy is learning the same first with raw Spring framework. Then what he will do, he will also connect to DB, but for that he has to learn JPA, he has to learn Hibernate, he has to learn ORM, and he has to learn what is connection pooling and some other low level components. So obviously this guy will be more knowledgeous by the time he is doing the stuff with Spring framework, and then whenever he will be switching to Spring Boot, he will say, okay, now Spring Boot is helping me to do all this stuff, so I know what is going on behind the scene. Now I as a developer is fully confident to use the Spring Data JPA because I know how it works behind the scene because I have done it manually while I was learning the raw Spring framework and the Spring ORM and Hibernate and all this other stuff. So it is really good first you learn few modules with raw Spring framework and then you switch to Spring Boot. Then you will appreciate Spring Boot, you will love Spring Boot, and you will be basically understanding how Spring Boot works internally. And as a developer, it's very important to understand that. So choice is yours. But one thing I'll tell you, if there is no one to help you, it's always good to start with Spring Boot and learn with Spring Boot only because you will get less error and you will be having a happy learning path. Okay, but if there is someone to help you, then you can try this as well because this will make you confident and this is make you a sound developer. So that's something that I want to discuss about the path to or the road to to be a Spring Boot expert. I will not say if we learn all these things we'll be an expert, but we will at least know something, will at least can work, we can at least can fix issue. And if there is some new modules that we have to learn, we at least can sit and can learn independently without any help from any other people. Okay, so best of luck. I'll see you in the next video. Till then, good day, goodbye, and happy coding. Hey, don't forget to subscribe. That's important. Do subscribe to my video as well.